Awesome. So yeah, this is going to be a technical deep dive into ControlUp automation. So this is going to have some expectations that I'll just kind of lay out here first. I guess first and foremost, what is ControlUp? So we are a monitoring and management platform that can help in all sorts of ways. We can monitor Windows machines, the actual user sessions, and the processes underneath. And then not only can we do monitoring, we can actually do actions where we can actually right-click on any of these objects and do some kind of management task, whether it's reboot a server or log off a user, start a chat, or something completely custom where you can actually extend the ControlUp product in any way, shape, or form with script actions. So that's kind of ControlUp in a nutshell, but we're going to be talking about automation today. So let's start with the very simple question: how do we automate? So in general, we can automate by determining what is our failure state and what is our success state. So in this example here, I've got like a Zen desktop registration. It's currently unregistered. That would be a failure state. And so what would be the success state? So we want to move it into a registered. So we know if it's in unregistered, that's bad. If it's in registered, that's good. And the same is also true for products like Horizon. If an agent is unreachable or if their broker is having some kind of issue, we want to have it telling us that it's available or in whatever the success state might be. So that brings up the biggest question. How do you change something like agent unreachable into something like available? And the way that we come to that conclusion today is we use scripts. And ControlUp, we love scripts. They're a way that we can extend our product in crazy ways. And I know some of you might be saying, scripts? Okay, I don't really know how to script. I don't really know PowerShell. I'm sorry to say it's 2020 now. PowerShell's been around for a very long time and it's getting better and better. You got to get into it. But even if you don't know PowerShell, you probably know how to read. And if you know how to read, the script is a very verbose language. It's not too complicated to understand, and I think most people can actually download a script, find out that little section that actually solves the problem, and then tweak it for their environment. So how do you change agent unreachable into available? You use a script. And so here'd be an example of something that does just something ridiculously simple. Just stop the service, start the service, and your problem is solved. So now that we know scripts can take our failure to success, we need to think about getting the system to run it for us. And so how can we get the system to run it for us? With ControlUp, we have a feature called triggers. So what are triggers? The whole nutshell of what a trigger is, it evaluates to a true or false. So it's a set of conditions, and those conditions can have operator statements in them and or is not. So we can set a series of conditions, and we can set this logic out so that way it evaluates to either true or false. And if it's true, the trigger fires. If it's false, then it just continues to move on and moves on to the next trigger. So we support a variety of different fields, and two specific comparisons that we do is we do string comparison, where we can support wildcards, where we can put an asterisk at either the beginning or the end of some text, and we will just do a simple quick string comparison to see if that evaluates to true. Or we do numerical, where we can do greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, or whether it's equal. And again, we can prepend is not added to that. So that way you can do the is it numerically greater than or equal to, is that false? And same with the string comparison. So an example of what a trigger would look like is something like this. If HZ state is agent unreachable. So looking at this image that we have here, we can see we've got one object that is in this state. And so this would evaluate to be true. Pretty simple. Within ControlUp, this is what it looks like. HZ state is agent unreachable. Awesome, it's true, it's good. So something else we can do with our triggers is now that we can do conditions and we can start laying it out in that logical sense, we have got an advanced feature, and then where we can group them into collections. And so now this is a series of conditions that can be evaluated as a whole. So for instance, there isn't just like agent unreachable as one particular fail state, there could be multiple. So if HZ state is agent unreachable, or if HZ state is unknown, or if HZ state is, and here's where that wildcard comes in, asterisk error, because there could be multiple different error messages, and all of them mean it's a failure. So we can group this together, and this is kind of just like, you know, when you do mathematics and you put the bracket over top, so that way everything needs to be figured out within the brackets, and then you actually get your answer. This is what this does. So the collection itself will evaluate to true if all of these, if one of these states, because I'm just using or statements, is true. And then you can add conditions outside of collections, and you can have nested collections. You can have just multiple collections underneath. So for instance, in my example here, I'm looking for, is HZ state agent unreachable? Is it in any one of these states? If that's true, then it evaluates to the next one, and if user session is 0. And when I say it evaluates to the next one, that's exactly what I mean. ControlUp actually evaluates top to bottom. So if you can actually optimize your triggers, if you've got a lot of conditions in your trigger, to make sure that you have the most likely state that is going to be your failure state to be on top, because if it's going to be true, then it'll just skip it and continue. Or if it's going to be false, then however you want to have it set up in order for that trigger to activate, you want to have that first statement to be at the top. So as an example of using a collection with additional conditional statements, here is what it looks like. So this collection is true. We're looking for HZ state is agent unreachable, in error, unknown, already used, domain failure, and HZ maintenance mode is false, and VM power state is powered on, and user session is equal to or is less than or equal to 0. So if we wanted to just kind of think aloud here, what we're actually accomplishing. So obviously we're looking for the Horizon agent for the state to be in some kind of failure. And the same is true for Citrix, although Citrix has less failure states here. I think it's unregistered is usually the biggest one. But in the Horizon one, they've got, you know, lots, so it's just a little bit more interesting. So we're got a collection. We're looking for, is this collection true? Is any of the Horizon states in this type of situation? And if it is, it goes to the next one. Is maintenance mode false? So what we're thinking about when we're developing this trigger is we want to know, is a machine unreachable? Is it not able to have a user log into it when it should, right? So we're checking for the maintenance mode to be false. If it's false, then it should be accepting a connection. Is it powered on? Yes, then it should be accepting a connection. Is there a user session on it? And the reason why we're checking for user sessions is because there are certain situations where you could have a user connected to a server and they might actually be remoting, even though the agent itself is having some kind of problem, the actual connection might be good. So we don't want to be doing some kind of remediation action if someone is connected and actually using that. So we're actually checking to see if it's 0. If it's 0, then that means that the machine is in some kind of sickness. So all that evaluates to true, and then we do the trigger. However, there is, in the current state of the triggers that you see here, or in the current state of these objects, the agent unreachable object would actually not fire after we create the trigger. So when you create these triggers, if something's already in the failure state, it's going to stay there. And so why is that? And the reason goes into how we do evaluation. So within triggers on ControlUp, evaluation is done on state changes. So what is a state change? So thinking about this for a second, a state change is when one of the values changes. So in this example here, we're going from 0 to 2%. So this is a state change. Every time a value changes state, ControlUp checks its triggers and see if there's something attached to that particular column where that state changed. And if there is, then it does the evaluation and sees if it needs to do some kind of action. So there is some exceptions though, and at least 2 that I'm aware of, although I think it might be true for any text-based time fields, is like uptime and idle time here. You can see that it says like 1 day, 11, 19. It would be really nice to have triggers that you can operate off of this. So I don't think they do. I think that specifically the time-based ones fail, but how ControlUp actually gets around this is we actually offer 2 additional columns that are green-based columns that will actually operate. So in this particular one, uptime in days was what you would use instead of uptime, and idle time, and that's not minimum, that's minutes. So idle time in minutes. So every time a minute increments, this value will actually just increment. So if we know we have to wait for a state change, is there a way that we can maybe force the evaluation to actually test to see if the triggers can actually just fire against all the resources that we have in our system? And so the answer to that is yes. We can force evaluation. There's a couple tricks that we can do. The first is to make sure that when you create your triggers, you are adding this. So this is available on all the triggers, include not just machines, but it'll say processes or sessions that were just discovered, i.e. have no previous state. And to understand how we can force evaluation, we kind of need to go into the architecture diagram of ControlUp a little bit. And so this is kind of the ControlUp architecture diagram. And to understand where the automation is actually being run, it is actually being run on the monitor cluster. So these are machines that you stand up in your environment. You tell ControlUp to install the monitor service on those machines, and here is where all the evaluations for all the triggers being done. So if we want to force evaluation, we have to have the monitors running, and we can do two things. One, we can actually remove an object and then re-add it, and when it's re-added, it'll have no state, and then the monitor will connect to it and it will get a state, and that will force trigger evaluation. Or at least in my experience, if you restart the monitor servers, full evaluation gets done and all the triggers get activated. At least that was true for 7.4. I don't know if that's true with the monitor cluster today, but at a minimum, removing and adding the object should force an evaluation as long as that checkbox was set. So just really quick, in order to restart the monitors, if you wanted to do that, you can just right click, and if you right click on the first arrow where it has default for me, it'll have a stop all monitors. You choose stop all monitors, then right click again and go start all monitors, or you need to stop the individual monitors. And the reason why we need to stop all the monitors, not just one, is because the monitors will dynamically reallocate data sources as needed. So that's the devices that it's connected to, in order to keep monitoring your environment. So yeah, and then obviously you can just right click on the monitors themselves, or you can click on the little red box, but be careful not to click on the little red and white X, because that will actually remove the monitor. So just stop them, stop all of them, start them all, and then as they connect to resources, they should do an evaluation, because essentially to the monitor is the same thing as adding an object. So there are some gotchas about triggers that trip up a lot of people. And so this is a very feature-rich part of ControlUp. And so it's complex, no doubt about it, but hopefully this will give you some insight and help you simplify that down. So some gotchas that might prevent triggers from firing, or might make you think they should be firing when they're not. So the biggest one is, at ControlUp, every time a trigger is fired, it creates what we call an incident. And this is how in the past, if you take a step back and if you think about ControlUp, before we had automation, triggers were used for alerting. And so when an alert is created, we would call that an incident. And so this was a way that you could actually track individual resources in your environment to find out how many incidents they created. So we still leverage the same mechanism now for the triggers for automation, and so the same limitations apply. If the incident quota is exceeded, you get no trigger operation. You can actually schedule when trigger evaluation happens, and what I mean by that is you can actually schedule when a trigger will be watching for the state to change. And so this has a lot of power and flexibility that I've been trying to play with a lot, and I'll kind of go into it a little bit, like what I think some of its potential is, but I think it's important to mention as well. And then another one is the minimum time in state. So you can actually tell ControlUp, and we have an absolute bare minimum of 3 seconds that something needs to be in that state. And this is to stop things like transient issues or flapping, right? When something is low and then goes high and then goes low again. If it's there for that short period of time, then we just tell it to ignore it and continue on, because it needs to be in that state in a minimum amount of time. And then the last one is wait X minutes before repeating. So this is at the end of a trigger creation, there's a dialog box that has a little field there that you could specify how long you want to wait before the trigger fires, and I'll kind of explain what that means, but this is another catch-up point. And then the last one is the resource actually being monitored by the monitor. So when you go back into that monitor's view and you click on data sources, you can actually see a list of the objects being monitored. And if it's not actually connected to the monitor, it's actually not going to have automation happen. So this is that incident quota exceeded. So you can see very clearly here, this is when this happens, automation will stop. So this is an old screenshot from 2016. I don't know what the default incident quota is, but I know that for larger customers, we obviously increase this so that way you don't run into this, but it's not infinite. I'm not entirely sure why or what the performance penalty is, but if you do have a lot of incidents, you can actually take that blue bar on the left and you scale it all the way down to the right side in order to try to minimize the amount of data that it's trying to present to you. And so this next one is that scheduling. And so when you're creating the trigger, you can choose the scope to make sure that your object is within the folder scope that you've selected. And then the next one is the schedule. So by default, I think we have all days and maybe weekends and weekdays, but you can actually go manage schedules or add a new schedule. And when you do that, you can actually go to this view where, does anyone recognize that old calendar view? I think that's, you could specify that on like the old Windows AD where you could tell people they're only allowed to log on certain logon hours or something like that, but it's the same view.
Yo, I think we have actually, yeah.
Hey, don't mind muting, that'd be great. All right, so anyways, we've got the schedule here, and you can see you can create custom schedules. So you could create something like as the triggers are only going to fire from 6 p.m. till 2 a.m. if it detects that the user sessions equal 0. So run the script reboot machine. And so this is quite powerful, because I think one of the challenges that we have in the EUC space today or in the world today is that now we need servers to have maximum availability and minimum downtime. And one of the challenges that we do today is that we set these servers to be offline at 6 and then we reboot them at 2. And if you have like a global workforce or something like that, that's a large window to wait for users to log off. And then if users maybe logged off at 6:01, guess what? That server is now just sitting there doing nothing when it could be servicing users. So if you could use schedule to do something like this, and this would be your trigger conditions, then you could bring that server back up. And if you've got like a script to bring it online as soon as a machine reboots, then at 6:05 it could now be servicing users, and it has gone through and done the reboot to refresh itself. So we think that's one of the features here that could be really powerful. And so the schedule can help keep it dynamic, and it can maximize availability and potentially performance, because now you're not shuffling a whole bunch of users on one particular server or one particular groups of servers. Now that load can be spread out across multiples because you've minimized that downtime. So how that would work is obviously at 5:59 you would need one user session, and then at 6:01 it goes from 1 to 0. This would work. But the gotcha is that if user sessions was 0 at 5:59, because that state doesn't change, the trigger never gets evaluated. So even though you move into the schedule, it would never reboot. So you'd have to make sure that your window is encompassing that last bit of state change, that the state change is occurring within that schedule. Okay, so for minimum duration in new state, so when you're creating the trigger, this is one of the other gotchas that I was referring to. So you can specify how long a resource needs to be in this failed state, or at least for the states to all evaluate to be true. So minimum duration in new state, it's in this particular example, it's 10 minutes. And where this trips people up is that a resource could be in the failed state, and it's within that 10-minute window, but then at minute 6 or 7, something has happened, and now it went back to a good state where whatever state happened to change. So user session went to 1 as opposed to 0, and then maybe that user logged back off and went back to 0. That counter gets reset. So there's no UI that really shows that visibility. You just have to wait. You just have to understand that if you have this minimum duration new state, you have to understand what that is, and you have to monitor your resources for when they're in this failed state and for how long that actually is. So we can actually use this to kind of set that timer. So an example, in this particular trigger example, we're looking at a Citrix machine. We want to know if it's in a failed state when it comes up. So that's why we have it set to 10 minutes, because you don't want to, as soon as it connects, as soon as the Citrix monitor or the ControlUp monitor connects to this machine, you don't want it to wait 1 minute if you've got like some startup tasks, right? So if you're using something like, well, I don't know if BIFS does it on the machine level, but if you're using something that actually does some kind of work, like a startup scheduled task that brings a machine from offline mode to online mode or something like that, or does some kind of preparation, you're loading app packages or something like that, you want to make sure that ControlUp actually starts monitoring or starts waiting when the machine is in the failed state to give it that time to finish that setup. So this is what you could use that for. And so this is the wait at least 1 minute before repeating. So this is at the end of your trigger. So what this actually means, this is a little bit complex to explain, even though it looks really simple. A lot of people think that this means that if you're in a failure state or in that state where the trigger should be firing, it's going to wait 1 minute and then repeat itself. So that is not what this means. This, if you think back to how ControlUp was in the past when it was an alerting platform, it didn't want to flood your inbox. And so what it would do is this allowed you to essentially pause the trigger if you're encountering that flapping, right? So like this implies the trigger will fire, every minute or whatever you said, but it does not do that. So in order to get this to fire again, it requires a state change from not your target state to your target state. So essentially, this is done to put a break on the trigger from firing over and over and over and over and over again. And I can give kind of a little example for what this could look like. So for example, we're looking at this one column. We could see the CPU had spiked. And over the period of time, you could see 0 seconds, 30 seconds, 60, 90, 120, 150, 180, and so on and so forth. So if I had set that wait at least this long, and my trigger was saying if CPU is at 99% or more, you could see it should have, and if my wait at least was set to 10 seconds, it would fire 1, 2, 3, 4 times. But if I set it for 5 minutes, it would have just fired once, and it would have ignored these other spikes. So you got to take that into consideration when you're designing this. Do you want something to be firing over and over and over again? Then set that wait at least to be as short as possible. Or if you just want it to fire once, so that way it's not, just trying the same hammer to try to nail down into the wood over and over again. You just wanted to do it once and see if it worked. Set it up to be something longer. And so when I was talking about, is this being monitored? You can actually click on the data sources within the ControlUp, and the data sources here will actually give you a list of the objects. And so this is what they look like. So here's how you can tell if they're being monitored. So you can see the machine name, the status, obviously the time. So this is all how long it's been since these machines originally started talking to the monitor. So make sure it's green, make sure they're, at least in the ready state. If they're red or if it's yellow, then automation is not going to be firing. All right, so now let's get into script actions. And so here's some gotchas for script actions when it comes to automation. Not all script actions can be run in automation. So as an example, you cannot run a script action where its execution context is ControlUp machine or its security context is prompt upon execution without setting default shared credentials. And the reason for this is ControlUp console, when you've selected that in the execution context, means it's an action that you run manually, that the PowerShell script or the CMD or VBS script is going to be run where you are running that ControlUp console. And for the security context, if you don't specify a default shared credentials, obviously it's prompting you for credentials, and that gives you the opportunity to enter something unique. So if you have either of these two selected, this script will not be available for execution as an automated action. And as well, within the script itself, you can specify arguments. If you do not specify a default, it will not be available for execution. Now, I believe ControlUp will actually detect that you've got a prompt for parameter input, and it will actually tell you if you want to use this script for automation, you need to specify a default, upon which then you close out of the automation wizard, you go back in here and then you specify a default. But if you don't, it's not able to be used. And I mean, this all makes sense, right? Because if you need some kind of user interaction to prompt you to input some kind of information, then obviously an automated tool can't do that without knowing what it just can't do that. It can't make that recommendation without knowing what it's supposed to be. So put in those defaults, make sure that it's either set to target machine, other machine, or if it's user session. So let's put this all together. Let's think about how we can test this, and let's think about if we can see if it worked. So obviously we can see if it worked by, usually if you're executing some command and you want a failure state to go into a good state, then bang, you just do that, put that in there. And if you see it change, then you expect that it worked. But there's ways we can check. So I've got a little video here. So this is me. I'm going to check to see if I've actually run a trigger. So you go to incidents, and then from here, you'll want to shorten the amount of incidents that you want to look at. So if you're just testing automation, you want to keep it like right to the end, because obviously it'll have just fired. And then you choose what area that it was occurring in. So if I was testing a session one, then I'm going to session stress. And so you can see here all of my triggers, all of my automation that was actually executing. And so when you see all those, you now know that it ran successfully. And the same is true for machines. Now we can see out of all my machines, I've only got one trigger for automation, and that was the AAC CPU 100%. So use the incidents to see if it fired. And the incidents are updated usually pretty quick. So take advantage of that. Another way to do it is within the trigger, we have this. You can actually specify a series of follow-up actions. So you can send an email alert to yourself, which is what a lot of people do. You can dump the views to a disk. You can record an event in the application log, play a sound in the console, send an email alert using your local SMTP server, or run an action. So obviously, send an email alert. That's kind of what everyone kind of chooses. They want to see that email come up in their inbox, which is great. But I am always a bit challenged by it, because I hate the delay of waiting a minute or 2 minutes to know if a trigger happened. Usually I need to know like right away, because it's faster to develop this stuff when you get that immediate feedback. So dumping the views to a disk, that's a good choice if you want that immediate feedback as well, because you can actually specify which view and ControlUp you want. So if you're testing an automation to see if your state and your conditions are right, then this will actually dump the view at the time that the trigger ran. So if it's in a failed state, you'll get essentially a CSV file of the view that you want. So like machines view or user session view or something. And then you'll actually be able to see what those states were, because it'll have the list of call-ups and their actual values. You can record an event to the application log. So again, that happens immediately, but you need to be monitoring the event viewer. And unfortunately, the event viewer, you can't tail it like a log, right? Like an actual file. So it does it and it's immediate, but the event viewer is kind of limiting. You can play a sound alert in the console. So I actually like this one. And when I was testing it out, I found it to be very helpful. But then as I started testing more and more triggers, and you can select the alert sound that you want, and the alert sounds are the default Windows sounds. So, you can get the like ding or ping or I don't know, shing or whatever they are. And so I started using that in all my triggers, and then I couldn't remember what the different sounds meant for what. So it becomes a bit difficult to kind of sort that out in your head. So I've actually got the last one, run an action. I've come up with another way to actually get that immediate feedback that the trigger is fired. And, in the days as they are today, when you're working from home, I actually quite enjoy this, because now I've got someone else talking to me. So I've actually created an action where I'll have the trigger fire and it'll tell me that it fired. And so I think this is pretty cute and amusing, and I can show it. So let's go to how that's going to work though. So first off, what I've done is I've created an SPA, and this is it. So our script action, it's 3 lines. So I add the assembly type system.speech, and then I create a new object from it, and then I tell that object to speak some line of text. So you can see it'll say like trigger fired for something, CPU is now something percent as an example of one of the ones I'm just done. And so I'm just going to give a quick live demo as to what this looks like. So what I've got this trigger here, CPU is 100%. It's on a machine record. I'm actually looking at greater or equal to 50% just because I was testing it. I've just got it scoped out to one particular folder, and I've created that script action speak CPU percentage. And we can look at what CPU percentage looks like. All right, speak CPU percentage. So very, very simple. So here's the magic for it though. In order for this to work, I have to specify the execution context is other machine, and I have to specify a local machine that I've got sound going to. Now, I'm pretty lucky in my home lab here, I'm not remote, so I'm actually just on a physical device, and I can tell ControlUp to actually execute this script on this machine with this credential, local system. Okay, and then obviously super simple script, and then my argument is I'm doing the machine name and the CPU. And so what I'm going to do is I'm monitoring this guy here, which I happen to be connected to, and I'll leave him up. I'm just going to burn the CPU here, and let's see if we can hear it. We'll wait for the CPU to hit 100%. And then
trigger fired for W2019-001. CPU is now 100%.
Man, I hope that came through because I just love that. I think this is just amazing. Anyways, yeah.
It definitely came, Trent.
Oh, fantastic. It's so awesome. Like, you know, it's talking to you, and then you get that immediate feedback. All right, I know that trigger works. It's a bit amusing. I was testing like users logging on to the machine, and then I had a robot just logging them on constantly, and then all of a sudden it was user blah 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 is logged on, user blah 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 is logged on, user blah blah is logged on, and it was just cascading. It's just nuts. I love it. All right. Let's get back to the presentation. Okay. So that's kind of putting it all together. So that's doing the trigger, that's doing the script action. You can see how to test the trigger now. I showed the script. If you want, I can throw it on Twitter or whatever. It's very short, so it's quite nice. So is there another way to track to see if a trigger actually fired as well, is that it will actually generate an event. Every time a script is run, ControlUp tracks it. So it logs it in the event. And so it looks like this. It happens in the event viewer. And you can see, obviously, this is the result you get. So you can actually check the event viewer to see if a trigger fired or if a script fired, and you can actually see the results of that script. So I'm actually, I think just about 5 minutes early, so that's not too bad. So happy automating, you know, thank you so much for being here with this, and I much appreciate. So I hope if you guys are using ControlUp, the automation platform, that you know, you'll gain a better understanding and a deeper understanding of how it works, and you guys can start playing with it and toying with it, because I think, you know, in the world of today, we need automation to help augment our abilities, because it sounds like the IT people and the customers I'm working with, they're just getting, you know, slammed. So is there any questions?
Yes, we do have some questions here, and people, if you have more questions, just put them in now. We have 10 minutes that we can fill up with Q&A, so keep them coming. So we have one here from James. Would you want to place monitors in each geo data center, multiple Citrix sites globally separately from the primary management data center?
Yes. So we do have what's called a monitor cluster now, and you can actually create new sites. And you want the monitors to be local to the resources that they're monitoring.
Excellent. So keep them close.
Yeah, locality is important for sure.
So we have another one here from James. How about IoT and using something like light bulbs, color changes, or something?
Yeah, I haven't got
groups.
Yeah, that is something I want to get into. I mean, if you can do it through PowerShell, you can do it. That's like the joy of the ControlUp platform, is that it uses PowerShell. So having it run on another machine that has your modules that allow you to control your IoT things, right? If you can feed parameters that include locations, which, you know, ControlUp has a feature called branch mapping, where if you map out where your users are based on subnet, you can actually pass that to, you know, your other machine or wherever the monitors are, and then they can actually execute a script to change like all the light bulbs off if it sees all the users are gone or something like that. So I haven't personally played with that, but like it's feasible. It's totally feasible.
Okay, so we have another question here from Dwayne. Will the new version be easier to install and set up for on-prem?
So I don't think the installation has changed, or if he's referring to the monitors, like the ControlUp application, it's a portable app. You can download it off the web. It's just a .1 exe. You can, you know, put it on a flash stick and take it to another computer and run it from there. But the monitors themselves, it is a service that needs to that requires a Windows machine that needs to be added. So it's not much different than what it was in the past, where you just go, you know, add monitors to site, you specify the machine, and then it just pushes out the monitor service to it automatically.
Yeah, I think it's referring to, you know, when you have issues, you don't get the RPC connection, VMI, IP, you know, you have to make sure that your DNS is working properly, because if not, you will have some issues. You also have the possibility to push out the agent, the MSI agent by itself using, for example, GPO. So that way you make sure that it's getting installed on all your targets. But again, you need to have your firewall open. If not, the agent will get installed, but you know, depends on your setup there.
Yeah, may not connect for sure. We have that all on our website too, all the ports and everything that ControlUp requires.
So we have another one here from James regarding Octoblue. I was stating that as well on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, and it seems like Octoblue open source is free to use as an open source project, I think. So there is some information there if you go Google.
Yeah.
Let's see, we have another one here from Javier. Is there any training document or video that show how to create a PowerShell script tailored for ControlUp? So basically, you know, people know how to create PowerShell scripts. They know how to make the PowerShell script work. And I know we had this discussion before. So any forms of training for best practices in terms of how you create the script properly, working in a SPA trigger context.
Yeah, so I mean, the way that ControlUp operates, and I guess I could do a technical deep dive into the script actions themselves, is it's just executing, you know, PowerShell.exe-file, and then points to the file and then passes on the parameters that you need. So if you can do that, then essentially all ControlUp does is plug that into it as well. So like looking at this, if I do test new, I execute my script or whatever. So really a lot of the magic is just in these arguments. So you specify what parameters you want to pass into your script for that action. So we do have documentation all on our website as to like how to create script actions. So it's definitely there. But if you're looking for something more personalized, then ControlUp does offer training as well. So you can look into that. Or, you know, I'm on World of EUC and on Twitter and stuff, so feel free to reach out if you're playing with it and you want to have some more information.
Exactly, and you can also go and just copy an existing script and just, you know, go from there. That's an option as well.
Yep, absolutely. And we got tons of community scripts. I mean, I think Guy Leach, you saw his presentation on PowerShell, so we actually have him writing scripts for us as well, and so he's well versed in it. I mean, we've got a large community of people who can certainly do it. But yeah, you can definitely learn by, you know, taking existing ones and poking at them and seeing what they do.
Okay, and Dwayne said they had someone assist with the POC, but they still not have it working. So Dwayne, I would recommend you reaching out to sales or support at controlup.com, and you will get up and running in no time.
Yep, absolutely.